Hello, and welcome to the Christchurch Fox Chapel podcast. It's the fastest growing conservative, evangelical, charismatic Amos podcast. The entire Toccoa area. It's going to be an Amos podcast for quite a while, I think, Ben.
Yeah, I couldn't think of anything better than Amos. I got to keep working on that.
I can't think of anything better than Amos. I'm all in.
Yeah, I'm sold. It's only time. It's only sermon number 2. Still in chapter 1.
Oh, that's great.
We're only on verse number 3, but I've gotten into Amos hook, line, and sinker.
I cut so much stuff from my sermon last week, and I had 2 verses, and I'm just looking at your passage today, which is verse 3 down to, keep scrolling,
chapter 2 verse 3.
Right.
I have a whole,
You have a whole chapter.
Yeah, but mine's kind of repetitive-ish. It's sort of, he has like a, there's this formula, right? Well, we're first off, recap. Amos is a prophet.
Yes.
Just like Jeremiah was a bullfrog. And he's among the shepherds of Toccoa, which is south of Bethlehem.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. Which is south of Jerusalem.
Yeah. So he's like a rural kind of guy. He's like a farmer in Israel. And so I forget, is he is he like speaking to Israel primarily? Because he lives in Judah.
So he is primarily speaking, so Israel in the north, Judah in the south. He's from Judah in the south. He is primarily speaking to Israel. Though in your passage today, he's actually talking to all the foreigners. But he does go on to talk about Judah. So I think he's actually speaking to both kingdoms, but it seems as though most of his stuff is aimed at Israel.
Okay.
The overwhelming amount of it is aimed at Israel.
So it's kind of like if we were speaking against Canada.
Yeah.
Which we could do.
We could.
Just to place this for all of you who are listening to this years in the future and trying to trace the early outlines
Trudeau
of
point.
Shuttleworth's thought. Yeah. Trudeau just stepped down.
I know.
Wild.
I know.
Wow.
But he might yet still become the governor of the state of California.
Yeah.
Trump tweeted that Canada could join the USA. So you never know.
Yeah. Well, that's very interesting.
Yeah. Pierre Poilievre, who's running in the Canadian election, has really fascinated me. He gave a speech from some sort of orchard, and he munched an apple throughout the interview.
Oh, really?
And I thought it was really cool. And he looked like Amos to me.
That's a man at ease with himself.
He was very much at ease with himself.
Like, it's the opposite of neuroticism. Like T.S. Eliot's J. Alfred Prufrock, you know?
I remember that.
Do I dare to eat a peach? Like, because eating a peach is embarrassing, I guess. It's sloppy.
It's a disgusting thing to eat.
It's they're delicious.
Well, they taste nice, but you don't want to be seen doing it.
Well, what I do is I take a knife and I cut the peach up.
Yeah. Very nice.
And I then eat it in sections. And that's basically what I've done with this passage.
Oh, I was about to say it.
Oh, yeah, I beat you to it. So So Amos is, he's a prophet. He's giving oracles. The Lord is giving oracles and speaking them through him.
Yeah.
And I think that's important. That this is not like the word of a man.
Yeah.
This isn't like Amos's perspective.
No, and it's what he saw. So it's not like God's saying, say these words. He's showing images and Amos is writing them down. So it does make him an interesting prophet, because we've got prophets that get told what to say and then they say it. And we've got prophets that get told what to write and they write it. And now this guy's getting shown what to write. So he's interesting in that respect. And that will explain why so much of the passage we're looking at right now is just filled with images. So there's poetic devices, you might say poetic devices, as he introduces ideas to show how serious they are, numbers and things used very poetically. And then we go from very literal language about things like punishment to very metaphorical or epic simile, sledges, iron, threshing, fire, devouring, strongholds, scepters, all sorts of big images, right?
Yeah, those are big images.
How should we talk about it, Ben? Because you're the expert on this bit.
Let's just jump in. No, not at all. Let's just jump in, though. Thus says the Lord, verse 3, for 3 transgressions of Damascus, and for 4, I will not revoke the punishment.
Okay. And we get this, so these sections, he says for 3 transgressions of Damascus and 4, and then he says for 3 transgressions of Gaza and 4, for 3 transgressions of Tyre and 4. You get the pattern. Yeah.
Well, and the idea, right, is that like 3 is a number of completeness.
Yeah.
So for 3 transgressions, that would be enough. That would be enough to justify God's judgment. But and then it says, and 4, it's sort of a Jewish idiom or way of saying like, this is more than deserved.
Okay.
This is like this is they've so crossed the line that they deserve this. So
the ESV Study Bible links to Proverbs. You see this? I don't know if you saw this. There's a proverb, right? So Proverbs 30:21. There's just a little footnote. And again, as we talk on air, what we have is we have our Bibles open and we have these ESV Study Bible, and we have expository commentary and the Tyndale IVP series, and they kind of all scroll as we scroll through Scripture. All of the notes scroll with it. Kind of handy. There's hot links. So Proverbs 30 verse 21 says this: "Under 3 things the earth trembles; under 4 it cannot bear up." So it does back up your idea that this is an idiom.
Yeah.
In Hebrew, maybe 3 of this, 4 of that.
3 of 4. Yeah, it's a figure of speech. So he speaks against Damascus. Well, another thing I want to note here. In each of these things, he says for 3 transgressions. Transgressions. And the author of the Tyndale commentary notes that this word transgressions also can be translated acts of rebellion.
Yeah, I see that.
And so the funny thing is that they're talking about all these surrounding nations, right? The Philistines, the Moabites, the Edomites, the Ammonites, the Syrians. These are like all of, if you were to draw a circle around ancient Israel, Israel and Judah, these would be, you have the folks who are up and to the right. The northeast. You have the folks who are up and to the left, the Phoenicians around Tyre. You have down and to the left, the southeast,
which is Philistia,
the southwest rather. Yeah, Philistia, Gaza, which is interesting. That's been in the news, right? And then you have Moab and Edom to the southeast, and then Ammon directly to the east. So like all of the folks, all of the neighbors, like if you were to draw like a chart of the 9 houses that surround your own. This wouldn't work for yours because you're out in the woods, but like the people who are closest to you. Yeah. That's like what Israel is doing here. That's what God is.
It's like the map from Game of Thrones.
Yeah. So, and he says that these are transgressions or acts of rebellion. So, under the David's dynasty, these areas, or most of them, would have been incorporated into Israel.
Or subdued in some way, right?
Yeah. So God is saying the nations are accountable to him.
Yeah. All of the known world is.
All of the known world is accountable to him.
So these judgments, we said last week that the fact that God is speaking from Zion in Jerusalem and Judah is a repudiation of the north. He's speaking against Mount Carmel, which is the location of all of this Baal worship and things going on in the north. Yeah. So God, from his traditional holy place, is speaking out in judgment against this pretender, this false mountain. Tale of 2 mountains, Mount Zion, Mount Carmel. And of course, what's going on in Israel in the north is that they have adopted some of the religions and gods of the surrounding nations. So Israel, big Israel,
Yeah.
That is to say, the United Kingdom of Israel, old Israel.
Yeah.
Surrounded by all these bad guys that they've been fighting with for years.
Uh-huh.
And at this point in the story, the Israelites in the north have taken on some of the false gods of the regions around them. Baal, Molech, probably.
Yeah. He says in
Regional
chapter
gods.
2, verse 6, for 3 transgressions and for Israel, of Israel, and for 4 I will not revoke the punishment. They lay themselves down beside every altar on garments taken in pledge, and in the house of their God they drink the wine of those who have been fined. So he's Israel's sin is idolatry, but that's not the sin. Idolatry is not condemned among any of these other nations. Isn't that interesting?
Because that's what they do.
What they are condemned for, universally, and all of these are human rights violations.
Let's get in. Okay.
Isn't that crazy? It's all inhumanity. So, for instance, Damascus, the Syrians, right?
Which is we speak is where there's a 5-sided argument taking place right now as Assad's forces crumble, and Russia loses its bases, and a new caliphate rises, and the Kurds are being pushed out. We've got a multi-party dispute going on in that very place right now.
Isn't it funny that this area has been the center of warfare for eons and eons, and even in this day, like the commentaries it's really fascinating to have, because there's so much history underlying this.
Yeah.
Amos is speaking into a historical political moment. He says the Syrians have threshed Gilead with threshing sledges of iron. So Gilead is this region of Israel that's to the east of the Jordan River. It's in the northeast. It's this kind of like fertile, rolling area. It has woodlands. It has grazing land. But it was easily attacked because it was right next to Syria. And so whenever you had a weak king in Israel, the Syrians would come down and just absolutely plunder and destroy. And so he gives this image of treading, threshing grain, which this is I had to look this up. So you have my phone is going off. I'm sorry. You have this, if you wanted to separate grain from its shell or from its chaff, you would have this like sled sort of that was pulled by an ox, and you would pile all the grain into a pile, and then you would take the sled over it and it would just kind of crush it. And
so it's like a horse-drawn pestle and mortar kind of thing. It's just crushing and... So instead of a mill with a stone, you're just dragging this thing back and forth.
Yeah, back and forth and just crushing everything.
Cool.
And then you pile it up and you crush it again. So a threshing sledge of iron, it's just totally destroyed.
So it's like just dragging this destructive force through the heartlands of Israel.
Yeah. You Syrians, you've destroyed the heartland of Israel. So I will send a fire upon this is, by the way, he says every time I will send a fire.
Right.
A consuming fire of judgment upon the house of Hazael, and it shall devour the strongholds of Ben-Hadad. Hazael was he was a king in the 840s toward about the 790s, and then his son Ben-Hadad was the king of Syria from the 790s to like the 770s. So he's saying, I'm going to send a fire upon your rulers, and it will devour your strongholds or your walls. So
even your strongest defenses against human invasion are not going to withstand the judgment of God.
Yeah. So you oppressed others. So your pride will be destroyed and your protection will be destroyed.
Yeah. Interesting.
I think it's pretty cool. I will break the gate bar of Damascus. Literally think of it's a wooden bar that goes across to block the gates.
Right.
And cut off the inhabitants of the valley of Aven. That was up to the north of Damascus. So, and him who holds the scepter from Beth Eden, and that was way up north. So God is saying, I'm going to judge this massive territory. All of you for this one thing that happened in the south.
There's going to be a total judgment of your whole territory.
Your whole territory is all under judgment.
Yeah, you see that they're having to go into exile in Kir.
Kir is way far away. Nobody's sure exactly where it is, but
it's my map.
It's probably around Babylon.
Right.
So hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles.
So you're going to be pushed to the furthest reaches of your own empire.
Yeah, or actually, I think beyond.
Right.
Yeah. So that's Syria. Like notice their treatment. They're judged for their treatment of Israel.
Yep. So they've come in through like a Viking horde. They've just come in wrecking the place.
Yeah.
And their place gets wrecked.
Yeah.
And an archaeologist would say that's exactly what happens. Most of these cities in that region that are called Tel whatever, like Tel Aviv. Tel is a hill, a man-made hill. And it's built on the rubble of old buildings. Wow. So the horde comes in, threshes or whatever, knocks all the buildings down. They go away. The inhabitants rebuild on top of the old rubble, and you get layer upon layer upon layer of rubble over thousands of years until the town is elevated, because it's literally built over the kind of fallen scraps of multiple old iterations of the same town.
A pile of bodies.
Yeah, and archaeologists can go back through and find different artifacts from different eras in the history of the town by digging deeper.
That's fascinating.
You have this hill made up as a kind of witness of all the times it's been wrecked, and so
it's just reminding me of something that I read, that in the north, or in all these English country parishes, right? You've probably seen this before.
I imagine
the churches always look like they're sinking into the ground a little bit. It's always slightly lower than the surrounding ground. It's all kind of mounded up. And that is because over the course of, they weren't built that way, and they're not actually sinking, but over the course of 1,000 years, if you calculate out the number of people who were buried in that area,
right,
it's thousands and thousands of people. And so
in the churchyard, it's full of disturbed ground and bones.
And so it built up the surrounding area. It's a pile of bodies.
Yeah.
Over the course of all this time, it just made me think of that.
That is interesting.
The time goes by.
I think our ancestors would walk into a church, right, through a churchyard that was full of graves.
Yeah,
and they would discover at the entrance to the probably the nave a font, right? And so every day that they interact with this church, they're reminded both of death and baptism, death and life, over and over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Traditionally in Anglicanism, we process twice, once to a burial and once to a baptism. Those are the only times you ever process in Anglicanism, traditionally. And each one was designed to remind you of the other. So they would live, wouldn't they, with this constant knowledge and reminder of the fragility of life, the promise of life, and of course the reality of death, and then the reality of life after death, over and over and over and over again. These people, I guess, are used to being treated this way. What's just kind of interesting is that these terrible human rights violations, as we put it, they would view as sort of normal.
Exactly, and that's the point. Like, it's anachronistic for us to talk about human rights at all, because human rights at this time do not exist. It is, I think, Jack London's idea of the law of club and fang is about the closest that it comes. There was a reporter, I forget what his name, I think it's Thomas Friedman. Is that right? I forget. Somebody can correct me on that. Who wrote about Hama he just wrote about the Middle East, and he said that there was this article called Hama Rules, and essentially, if there was a parable, if one day somebody came and they stole, robbers came and stole your chicken, and if you do nothing about it, the next day they'll come and they'll steal your dog, and if you do nothing about it, then the next day they'll come and they will abduct your daughter. And if you do nothing about it, then the next day they'll come and burn down your house. The point is that the only thing in this society that counts is just strength.
Right.
Mercy is merely always going to be taken for weakness. So
the idea of an avenger coming in for you is quite profound.
is revolutionary, that there is a deity who is going to judge the inhumanity of the nations.
Right.
Oh, that's like that.
So
that
they'd be used to the idea of any battle in the human realm being merely the visible version of a battle in the unseen realm. So it's really every battle is a battle of the gods, right? Yeah. My God versus your God, played out on the human battlefield. So they might view this as an sort of almost dispassionately and say, look, well, okay, Yahweh, the Lord, is obviously stronger than, probably Molech in their case. Maybe they look at it that way.
Yeah.
But God is saying, actually, there are some divine principles in this world of right and wrong that actually matter. There are some rights and ethics that we need to think about.
And it's not what's happening in this passage that's fascinating is this is more than just, oh, you treaded on Israel, therefore you will be judged.
Right.
They're judged for their human rights violations. Again, I'm speaking anachronistically.
Yes.
But they're judged for everything that they do, period. Case in point. Next one, verse 6. For 3 transgressions of Gaza, and for 4 I will not revoke the punishment. He's not talking about the Philistines who live down in the southwest along the coast. Mm-hmm. They were public enemy number 2 to Israel. Syria was number 1. Because they carried into exile a whole people to deliver them up to Edom.
Oh, okay. So they did a deal. Judah is in the middle, right? So Philistia, Gaza, that's on the coast, Mediterranean, bottom left, right? And then Edom is bottom right, towards the desert. Right. But Judah is right slap bang in the middle of those two. So he's saying that people came into Judah and abducted people. Philistines came into Judah and abducted people and then sold them to another tribe, Edom. Is that right?
Well, you get the same thing with Tyre later on. For 3 transgressions and for Tyre, that's up on the north west coast. And for 4 will not revoke punishment. They delivered up a whole people to Edom as well.
So Edom seems to be pretty keen on slaves.
Yeah, it's slavery. These guys are involved in a slave trade, and they are judged for it. Right. God is judging slavery in the Old Testament.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I think there's the sense here is of capturing people and carrying them into slavery
abroad.
Yeah.
Right, and all that's involved in that. There's not just the human misery and the threat to life, but there's also the ritual impurity, the cutting off of lines. Right, you're eliminating the prospect of family line continuing. You're pulling descendants away from temple worship and proximity to God. There's a whole raft of things. It's not just you will be mistreated or killed or whatever.
Yeah, you've disturbed the whole social fabric.
Right.
So the Philistines are being judged, and these are all Gaza. He says in verse 8, I will cut off the inhabitants from Ashdod, and him who holds the scepter from Ashkelon. I will turn my hand against Ekron. Those are 3 other of the cities of the Philistines.
Right.
The Philistines apparently didn't have... These cities kind of vied together for a capital. Basically, whoever had the strongest warlord, that was the capital of the Philistines at that time.
So like Texas 100 years ago.
Yeah, like Texas 100 years ago. It's a no man's land.
Austin and Houston battled for which was going to be the capital, and they had a low-speed cannon chase.
Did they really?
Yeah, they did. Yeah, so I forget which way around it was, but I think all the dudes from Austin went down and robbed some stuff from Houston and took their town cannon with them, and like Cannon Point stole a load of state documents and then set back up to Austin, but with their cannon, and dragging a cannon all that way, they were averaging about 2 miles an hour. And then the Houstonites kind of gave chase, but they brought their town cannon as well, because you can't go to a cannon fight without a cannon.
Yeah.
So they were like doing 2.1 miles an hour. And after the lowest speed chase in history, I think after 3 days, they kind of caught up and they were in the middle of nowhere and they pointed their cannons at each other. And then some bloke said, this is dumb. We're all going to get hit by a cannon. Let's have a beer. And then they went home.
Oh, really?
And that's the history of Texas.
That tells you everything you need to know about Texas.
I think so, yeah. So these towns are all vying for kind of supremacy, right?
Yeah, but they're all together under the judgment of God.
It's fun, though, to think that, we're not looking at a unified source here. Gaza is not a unified enemy. In fact, they've also got infighting.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, this is a complex geopolitical situation.
Right.
And God is pronouncing judgment for every specific thing.
Now, I've not read or watched Game of Thrones, but I've played the board game, and it looks like this map.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and it's once one person gets in the ascendancy, the others can just gang up on them.
Yeah.
Like a game of Risk or something.
Yeah, that's how it worked.
So I'm sure there was a lot of rising and falling of empires.
Yeah.
And Judah and Israel are caught in the middle, and they're being taken advantage of.
So to make short work of it, Tyre is judged for, that's the city up at the top in the northwest. They get judged for more delivering people to slavery. And also it says they did not remember the covenant of brotherhood. They broke a treaty. And so God's going to send fire upon their wall and devour their strongholds.
They're treaty breakers, so then they're unreliable.
Yeah, and so they'll be left defenseless. That's the case. That's what God does in each of these things.
Right.
His judgment is not actually cruel. It's just breaking down their arrogance.
That's good to know.
In Edom, Edom was the we'll treat Edom and Ammon together. The Ammonites and the Edomites. Edom is to it's like the southern area, and it says he pursued his brother with the sword and cast off all pity, and his anger tore perpetually. So
Fratricide?
Yeah, it's this bestial anger. But who are the Edomites? Well, they came from Esau. We learned in Genesis.
Yes.
And who is Esau's brother? Israel. So a lot of scholars think this is treachery against Israel, for which he is being judged.
Oh, it's okay. Okay, so it's going right the way back.
Yeah.
Right. I'm with it. I didn't see that.
And
I didn't see that at all. Wow. Okay. So the brother is Jacob, Israel.
Yeah. That, I mean, yeah, more or less.
Gotcha.
I think. I mean, there's some people have interpreted it slightly differently, but because they could have said brother could also mean like covenant partner, so it might be that they broke a covenant with somebody else, but
or it could be both. It could be that there's this pattern. I mean, we see this, don't we, with generational sin repeating. Yeah, are they permanent fratricidal people? Is that baked now into the culture and they've come from this person who's willing to do this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so again and again and again, they keep turning upon themselves.
Well, a lot of what the book of Genesis lays down in some of these genealogies sets, and some of these stories even sort of set the stage for Israel's understanding of her neighbors. So, for instance, if you get to Amos, the next two kind of paragraphs, the Ammonites and the Moabites, Ammon and Moab, you find their origin in this story in Genesis 19, where Lot's daughters, so Lot was Abram's cousin, brother, I forget. Nephew, yeah, that's right. He was his nephew. And they, Abram rescued him at one point. Lot's wife, Lot was chilling in Tyre, and then when Tyre and Sidon were judged, his wife turned back and turned to a pillar of salt, and so Lot's he's kind of shady.
It's fascinating. I mean, God says you can live anywhere you like in this big space here, but don't go to that other place over there. And he's like, oh, okay, cool. I'll just move to the very border of the place that's okay, right next to the place that's not okay.
Right to there, yeah.
Like, why? What's in his heart? I guess
going on?
His heart's always towards that place. It's like you can live anywhere except for Vegas. Okay, cool.
I'm going to go in the Nevada desert.
I'm going to go to the north rim of the Grand Canyon then.
So the weird thing then is that this is a weird story. His daughters are like, well, our father's line is going to end. So they get him drunk and then they sleep with him. And their children are their son, they each have a son, and one is the head of the Ammonites and the other is the head of the Moabites.
So what that's could possibly go wrong. Yeah.
Yeah. That's Israel's, like, that's their sort of understanding of that's where the Ammonites and the Moabites came from. So in this, the Ammonites, Amos says, they ripped open pregnant women in Gilead,
Poor Gilead.
that they might enlarge their border. So Ammon is the smallest of all of these nations, and it's kind of jammed between Israel, Moab, and Syria.
Yeah.
It's kind of landlocked.
Yeah.
By all and a desert on the other side.
Yes.
So they're always being encroached upon. And so it's natural that they would want to expand. But Amos says the way that you expanded was by preying upon the innocent.
Yeah. And in particular, some of the most vulnerable.
Yeah. The innocent and the vulnerable.
To the pregnant woman and the unborn.
Yeah.
Attacking the most vulnerable people that there are.
And so then you have this divine conflagration that ensues on them. I will kindle a fire in the wall of Rabbah, and it shall devour her strongholds. Rabbah is one of their cities, I think, with shouting on the day of battle. It's a holy war kind of like image. And a tempest in the day of the whirlwind, and their king shall go into exile, he and his princes together. The Ammonites will be judged for their treachery.
I find kindle really fascinating because normally he's sending fire, but this one's kindled.
Yeah.
And you wonder if that's a deliberate reflection of the idea of the ripping open of the unborn. There's this child that should be growing and developing that's terminated early. And so there's this fire growing and developing. Instead of instant fire, it's building. Almost like the nation is pregnant with judgment. It's growing and coming upon them. Just it doesn't seem as instant as the other words. Why break the poetry? I don't know. It's interesting that he puts it this way. I'm going to kindle this fire. And you know what it's like when you kindle a fire. It's little, isn't it? And small, and then bigger and bigger pieces start to burn.
Grow and grow.
Yeah, until it's a conflagration.
Like a child should.
And the wall. I kindle a fire in the wall. I mean, walls don't burn. So that's funny.
But they do when there's a whirlwind feeding the flames.
Oh, yeah. Firenado. We saw one of those a few years ago.
Firenado?
Yeah, when there was when there are great conflagrations like in California, often they create their own winds, their own vortex, and you can end up with a whirlwind drawing fire up into the sky from the forest.
Oh, that's cool.
A tornado of fire.
That's so cool.
So you could imagine
also terrible, but
yeah, you could imagine strong images here.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a really a crazy image.
And this is probably as close to a legitimate claim that the word storm is in the book that we're going to find. The gathering storm isn't quite in this book as a phrase. It's more in Churchill's speeches. But tempest is a hurricane or a stormy whirlwind.
The one commentator said, quote, "The whole scene reeks of a grand conflagration."
A grand conflagration.
Grand conflagration. That's what I should have said. That should have been my word.
Conflagratory.
Conflagratory. And then Amos, we're into chapter 2 then. Moab.
Oh, hang on. Their king should go into exile. That's just worth noting, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, he and his princes together. So the whole royal lineage is destroyed. So you've been destroying these lineages by breaking open pregnant women, and your lineage is going to go. You've been terminating things early. This fire's going to grow. I mean, that's a funny bit of poetry, poetic. What do you call it?
Simile?
Yeah.
Poetic justice?
Yeah, poetic justice.
Yeah,
poetic justice. That's interesting.
And then Moab, he burned to lime the bones of the king of Edom. So this is noteworthy. This is not something that was done against Israel.
Yes.
This is just their injustice. And it's noted that households in the ancient world, there was a moray, there was a sense of that you don't mistreat the corpse of an enemy king.
Okay.
No matter what. So when Jezebel was killed.
And eaten by dogs.
And eaten by
the body
dogs.
was mauled.
That was the worst thing. Like that is the most shameful thing that could happen.
When,
but the king or I forget who it was, but he wanted to bury her corpse.
Right, but a dog made off with her arm and
Yeah.
into the desert.
So like that is a shocking and scandalous thing in that culture.
Or like Judas's guts bursting when he hangs.
There's that too.
If that's quite, I don't know, the language is a bit strange, but yeah, it might be that somehow his bowels ruptured when he hung.
You really went there, Alex.
I love a rupturing bowel on this podcast.
Rupturing bowel. We at Christchurch love a rupturing bowel.
It's one of my favorite things.
Yes. I almost mentioned scatological humor in my annual report, and then my better judgment took over, and I decided not to.
Yes, I'm feeling condemned at this point because I don't think my better judgment prevailed in my case.
You did mention scatological.
I think so, yeah.
Or did you?
I spoke up for the team.
Did you enact scatological humor, or did you just mention that we make scatological humor?
Yeah, I've enacted it. Yeah.
Oh, you?
Yeah. Basically, I've based my report around it.
Around?
Yeah. As I reflect.
Yeah.
It's a core theme.
Really holding nothing back there, Alex, are you?
It's a core theme.
It's important, man.
It's important, Dominic. Right.
Okay, if you guys don't know that reference, listen to The Rest is History.
Oh, be careful. You will give over 250 hours of your life.
Yeah, but you'll be more informed for it. Okay, so Moab, they're bad. They burned the bones of the king of Edom. There's a degradation of personhood.
But you make this point
dishonoring.
That it's significant here that this is baddies hurting baddies. And this still hurts God.
Yeah.
God has a beef with them, even though this is bad guys fighting amongst themselves. And we might say, well, look, if our enemies are fighting each other, who cares? Why should we care that, it's not our fight. Why should we care, for instance, in Syria right now, that there's potentially 5 different tribes fighting with each other?
Yeah.
Okay, that's not to say that we should go and spend billions of dollars to get involved and make it worse. But on the other hand, we should still care about human suffering of any kind anywhere.
All of these things are registered in the mind of God. And I think that a lot of modern people, a lot of this, I think, the most significant theological points in this passage, as modern people, a lot of, I'm afraid that we're just gonna be like, well, duh. Of course, God judges wickedness.
Right, but this is a shock to them.
This is, well, where do we get that idea from? Where do we get this idea that God judges? Yeah, from here. Like this is revolutionary in the history of the world,
right?
In a culture that viewed just localized deities as like might makes right.
So to understand how revolutionary it is, it doesn't seem very revolutionary to us. That's indicative of the fact that a revolution happened.
But also I think it's important for us to remember that all of these things that we consider to be like inherent pieces of reality, human rights, don't abduct people and trade them as slaves. Don't burn the bones of your enemies. Don't murder pregnant women. Don't
break deals.
Don't break deals. Don't enact sexual violence against other people. All of this it would not, if you take away the reality of an omnipotent God, if you're not a theist,
then why not?
Then you have you have no basis. As Dostoevsky said, if God is dead, everything is permissible.
Right. Well, I mean, there would be no moral difference between a lion chasing down and devouring an antelope on the plains and the Holocaust.
Yeah. It
would just be survival of the fittest.
Well,
might is right.
That's precisely how the Nazis viewed it. They saw themselves as the new Spartan society. We're just practicing eugenics to make a better society.
Right.
That they had no concept of justice because they had no concept of a real God. So this is just, I think it's a word of warning to us. Like
it most certainly is.
And also judgment. People like to look at passages like this and say, "Oh, mean Old Testament God." No.
On the contrary, mean Old Testament people, and God is stepping in, showing His compassion.
Yeah,
for sure. And what we see in our world today is what happens when we push God out, when we become Moabite, when we become, or whatever, when we push God out and we just do what seems right to us, well, people suffer. Yeah. And if you look at the great horrors of the 20th century, there's always some atheistic element to them, whether it was the Cultural Revolution in China or killing fields under Pol Pot, or the gulags under Stalin, or obviously the Holocaust under Hitler that we've mentioned already, and all the way right up to kind of ethnic cleansing amongst Hutus and Tutsis, anything like that, and even the conflicts in the Balkans in the 90s.
Yeah,
they're all more or less something like each other, aren't they? We've got this utopia that's going to work for us and not for our neighbors, so we'll cleanse them out of the way.
Yeah. Yeah, atheism is the deadliest religion of all. And I think that's something we need to just address fairly, that if you love peace and you love righteousness and grace and mercy, then that means you have to love justice.
Right.
You have to love and long for a God to come and set everything right. And that means punishing wickedness.
It does. I mean, if you look at Moab, they in desecrating the defeated enemy's bones, what happens to their own leaders? They're cut off. It's not just sent away, and all the princes are killed, not just sent away. So there's this ending. And it looks as though they've achieved total control. To burn to lime the bones of their enemies would symbolically appear to be a total victory.
Yeah.
And yet what happens is God says that they'll die amid uproar and shouting and the sound of the trumpet. So a crisis will come to them, which will expose the fact that they're not in control of anything.
Calamity will come.
Will come.
And I find this to be a really interesting passage theologically too, for when we think about like God's sovereignty across the world. Yeah, because people often say, "Well, what right does God have to judge these people who are, maybe they didn't grow up in a Christian home or whatever?" I think it's interesting. The Lord judges these nations proportionally to the amount of their kind of knowledge.
Right. So we'll get onto this, won't we? With Judah, for instance, they'll be held to a higher standard because they do have the law. Yeah. And they do have a temple and a priest and a historical kingdom.
But these other nations are not off of the hook because through God's common grace and general revelation, his giving of there's certain knowledge that's just conveyed to everyone, and they still rejected it.
They did, and what they did was particularly egregious. So we're not looking at minor infractions here.
Yeah.
I mean, we're looking at covenant breaking or treaty breaking on an international scale. You signed a peace treaty with someone and then invaded them when they were asleep. You're looking at ripping open pregnant people, taking people off into slavery and desecrating tombs and some of the worst stuff you can do, right?
Yeah.
These are not minor infractions that we're looking at.
Nothing escapes his gaze. He's and all of the nations are under this God's authority. So, it's quite something for this shepherd, this like agricultural guy from south of Bethlehem to be seeing all of this. And understanding the geopolitical situation of his time. Yeah. But I think it points forward, right, to the ultimate exhibition of justice. So I've been thinking about how if Amos were to write oracles of judgment about our world and the place where we live, right? Well, what the things that he would point to,
well, and of course we in the church would be held to a higher standard, and Kat says this about ourselves in terms of sanctification, that the Holy Spirit gets pickier the more mature I get. That you just as you're more in step with the Spirit, you hear more refined kind of call from God to change and grow. What would God's judgment look like on our nation? That wouldn't be all the bad guys in America getting blasted and we, the Christians, being fine, but for the cross. And there's the distinction. So in fact, actually, we're held to a higher standard, and yet we survive. And that's the work of the cross.
Yeah, because actually that judgment is enacted upon us, except it's almost like the fireball comes down, right?
Yeah.
And in the cross, Christ steps in and takes the shot, takes the hit himself.
Yeah, so he's threshed and he's set fire to and he's crushed and he's all of these words that we're looking here. He's in the whirlwind, he's in the storm.
Yeah. So I guess the Christian message is not that you, not like, oh, follow Jesus and you can become one of the good guys so that you don't get judged.
No, I mean, that will happen. That's the bonus. But yeah.
That happens after. But first,
I mean, it's a selling point. It might not be where you.
but at first though, it's like, hey, the meteor is coming.
Yeah.
This is the last ship out.
Right.
Like, you hide here because the judgment, you are under judgment. You have merited judgment. Your sin is vastly significant. I mean, if we were to really reflect on all the ways in which our existence kind of destroys the world, it would be staggering.
Well, like Agent Smith says in the Matrix movies, that you're a cancer, you people.
Yeah.
All these bad things you do.
I mean, there's a whole movement. This is like in the far left of extinctionists that they argue that if you're going to take animal rights and everything to its ultimate end, we are a parasite upon the earth. We're destroying it. So the best thing we can do for the world is to destroy ourselves.
Yeah, and I'm not buying it.
I'm not buying it either. But it does, at least, what it does get right is the reality of wreckage that we have brought upon the creation. It's reckoning with what we do in fact deserve, except it's just a barren and hopeless vision, and that's not what we get with the gospel. We get a God who pays for the wreckage that we brought in, and then also,
and the wreckage is not abstract, right? So the wreckage of the world is not an abstract concept. It actually hurts humans. It hurts people made in the image of God.
Yeah.
Right. It could be economic, not just environmental we're talking about, but it could be economic, right? In terms of how people suffer.
Yeah.
Or even just like, there's places in the Pacific where just the whole island's just covered in trash. There's just Walmart plastic bags washed up on the shore all over the place.
And what is it, like 150 miles or something like that of trash?
A trash circle floating around.
Or it's the Foxconn building in China, the place where they make our iPhones, where they have nets around the building because so many people jump off the roof.
Right. Instead of improving working conditions, they just put nets up so that when people tried to kill themselves, they would bounce and then get back to work.
My iPhone is in my bag right now. To what extent am I complicit in this whole thing?
Well, and you can't not be.
No.
You really can't not be. I mean, every now and then there'll be a sort of hermit who'll go off to Alaska like Dick Prenneke and build a cabin and just live there on his own.
Which is what we're going to do.
It's appealing. But there's no way you can live in this world without doing these things.
Yeah.
So maybe part of the message of this would be, as you're judging egregiously wicked things, and there are many that our non-Christian fellow citizens are doing, and you could name them if you want to, it could be human trafficking, which seems to be a big thing. Mm-hmm. Obviously, institutions like Planned Parenthood, and there are very wicked organizations that do terrible things, right, that are antithetical to everything we stand for.
Yes.
Fine. But we are complicit in the system and held to a higher standard as believers.
Yeah.
So before we start throwing judgment around at people, we need to be aware of how much more we've been rescued from.
Yeah. Well, I think that when you are a sinner, the way that we utter a prophetic voice is through our repentance. And that when we acknowledge that we're just a little bit worse than everybody else, then we can really, or that we're on the same level, under the same judgment, then we can point to what real hope is and actually point out the sin.
Right.
Hiding from sin is not grace.
So this is a fun prophecy, because you can imagine the highs and the lows of the crowd, if there were one, being, they're a bit uncomfortable in verses 1 and 2 because it wasn't sounding too good. And now we're just beating up all the enemies around like, yeah! But of course there's a storm brewing. There's a gathering storm.
A storm is gathering.
A gathering storm.
A gathering storm.
And it's coming for us.
And it shall come for us on the seas, and over the land, and in the air.
With growing confidence in the air.
With growing confidence in the air.
All right.
Well, this was a good podcast.
Thanks, Ben.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
It's not really Wolpe and crescendo, but we'll go with it.
It's abrupt.
Abrupt is our, I guess maybe that's our new way.
Well, this has been a podcast of Christchurch Fox Chapel. Glad that you could join us. Thanks for stopping by.
But mostly, stay classy.
And thanks for stopping by.
Stay classy.